Social media discourse with bad faith bozos trying to tell you we need to see things from the bigot's point of view. You gotta love it. And no surprise at all, the usual suspects were in full swing for being as obnoxious and intellectually sterile as possible during Black History Month. I'm not a drama tuber, so I'm not sharing actual examples, but I'm sure you've seen some of it. One was a particularly galaxy-brained take about how too on-the-nose cartoons are these days, with their morals in regards to how it portrays bigotry, with special mention being the villain of the week of the cowardly banned Moon Girl and Devil Dinosaur episode, The Gatekeeper. The claim being its main antagonist, the transphobic Coach Greer, was an unrealistic caricature and that the bigot should have gotten more focus in an episode that was highlighting the show's transgender character, Brooklyn. Anyone who's tried to interact with trans creatives and needing a mass block tool for their slur-filled replies from the usual suspects will know just how much of a crock of shit that mindset is. Hey team, Phantom Skull, the super security VTuber here, and today we're disassembling this dumbass take by looking at the Gatekeeper's unrealistic villain, along with two other modern bigot-themed villains who were also treated as flat characters by some, and try to focus your attention on their themes. So spoilers for the following. This isn't going to be a deep dive like usual with these characters, so we'll only be focusing on what's important for the theme of the video. Trust me, I got a video on Belos coming down in the future, I just need to find the right dancing partner for him. Also, while I'm going to be a bit unfiltered, since I really don't see a point of being civil with the maliciously ignorant masking the stench of their bigotry with dog-whistling bullshit, I will try to rein it in simply to focus on the topic of debate. That being that bigots should have more nuance and humanizing qualities in our media, to see their side of the debate. The concept of some crusty asshole telling us we have to debate their right to call people slurs and demand no consequences for it, or for hurting others, is so astronomically asinine on its own. But the dog whistling to try and sea lion such vile takes is something worth having an intellectual debate with people whose only intention is to waste your sanity and oxygen trying to upset you, is just plain insulting. So quick primer about the shows these supremacist chumps all hail from. Moon Girl and Devil Dinosaur was a superhero story about a brilliant young inventor named Lunella and her pet dinosaur defending New York's Lower East Side from supervillains and other foes that were analogies for modern problems faced by urban youths and other systemic issues. This will be important later. The Owl House was about a human bi disaster named Luz getting isekai to a fantasy island learning witchcraft from a colonist witch, finding love, and stopping the schemes of a mad emperor hell-bent on destroying magical beings. And One Piece is an anime about adventure and friendship about a motley group of pirates known as the Straw Hats, adventuring to find the One Piece, a long-lost treasure of the king of the pirates, to make their dreams come true, while fighting the government, other pirates, systemic racism, classism, and a global conspiracy, amongst other things. The only other context you need for this video with One Piece's setting is fishmen and mermaids are a species of people that have been heavily discriminated against and enslaved by humans, leaving a lot of bad blood between the groups. Let's start with Greer since she's the hot topic that inspired this video. She only appears in the unaired Season 2 episode, The Gatekeeper, which Disney, cowardly rainbow capitalist bastards they are, prevented from airing. It's a focus episode on one of Moon Girl's friends, Brooklyn, a trans kid, as she struggles with the constant roadblocks put in her way by Greer to prevent her from playing volleyball with everyone else. I do take great annoyance at the claim of her being an empty straw woman, since I encounter so many two-faced types like her these days, acting all friendly and welcoming and all ooh-woo wholesome, only for the mask to slip when the topic of transgender people comes up, which ends up happening when she discovers Brooklyn is trans. The plot is about Brooklyn Lunella's basketball team about to play the championship game with the rival team, the Lady Leopards. Greer, the Leopards' coach, becomes slowly unhinged at Brooklyn's inclusion in the game. She looks for every possible rule or technicality to disqualify her, leading her to locking the entire team in a locker room with a magic key that forces them to play multiple games to be let out. I think an important note about Greer being a flat, bigoted character is how this is pretty par of the course for Moon Girl's rogues gallery. With the exception of the Beyonder and a few others, a lot of her foes are villains of the weak who don't have that deep of characterization beyond what issue or problem they're an allegory for. Aftershock being one for people exploiting vulnerable and neglected communities for their own personal gain, Siphonator being one for internet trolling and rage baiting, the Muzzlers basically being walking toxic gentrification and culturally sterile goons, attempting to silence diverse voices, and so on. Greer, while not a traditional supervillain like them, fits the bill with her petty transphobia, because that's the important thing about Greer that the debate misses. She's not supposed to be the focus of the gatekeeper, Brooklyn is. The entire episode was to touch on the struggles of trans people, particularly trans children, and what they have to deal with in this current era of hostility and consequenceless cruelty. We don't need Greer's life story or her point of view for why she's such a vicious, petty bigot. She's an unhinged jerk who has a self-righteous masquerade for justifying her bullying a child. Much like real-life transphobes who talk big about protecting the children from trans people, but under the same breath gleefully relish and laugh at the suffering of trans children, Greer's claim of wanting the rules followed and making things fair is complete bullshit, since she freely cheats and sabotages children over a volleyball game. This is directly paralleled by the games and rules Brooklyn and the team need to seemingly follow to escape the magical escape room they're trapped in. Despite them following the rules, the entire room resets and relocks, ultimately revealing to Brooklyn, well, take it away, Benny.
Truth is, the game was rigged from the start.
Brooklyn breaks down when she realizes what's going on. The magic door, which was using Greer as an avatar, said to escape, they had to follow her rules. And in the narrow-minded view of a bigot like her, the rules were intentionally made to exclude someone like her from public life. Brooklyn can't follow Greer's rules because she's her own person, someone Greer doesn't believe should exist. Unella and the team affirm her, and always vow to have her back, with them instead finding the key to escaping the room and Greer's useless, small-minded rules was to simply not give them the time of day and just wreck the place, making their own exit and rules. Unella put it best.
We've been trying to play by the rules, but when the game is rigged, that doesn't work. So...
we make our own rules. Instead of playing the game, we have to break through this whole system.
The team proceeds to break their way out, solidarity and camaraderie overcoming Greer's dogmatic gatekeeping. The episode ends with them exposing Greer's toxic bigotry and sabotage, even her own team and daughter turning on her for almost ruining the game out of petty spite. She's bitterly kicked out by the ref, and everyone, Brooklyn included, are allowed to do what they were wanting to do all episode, and just play some volleyball. The video that sparked this debate rather haphazardly attempted to compare the races in an episode of Static Shock, Sons of the Father, with its apparent humanizing take on Static's BFF's dad being a racist, not approving of his son's friendship, and how it was superior to the strawman Greer in Moon Girl. This got absolutely shredded on social media, pointing out one of the obvious problems with the comparison. These are two different types of bigots. Richie's dad is a racist, but he's just ignorant. It doesn't make him any less of a jerk, but his bigotry doesn't extend to much beyond intolerance and believing stereotypes. Compared to Greer, who is actively and maliciously going out of her way to force her transphobia on everyone else, and again, bullied and threatened a child out of pure malice by trapping them in a pocket dimension with lava and other dangerous shit. This is like comparing stale apples to rancid, moldy oranges. Of course, Richie's dad is going to get more focus and characterization, since he's someone who could realistically have his mindset changed given the events of the episode. Greer was never intended to be that. She was like every other Moon Girl villain of the week and an allegory for a problem modern kids faced. Hers being a very prevalent one that trans children face. The silliest take from it being the insistence that we have to care about the bigot and their reason for being like this, when in reality a lot of bigots don't have a logical reason. It is a very illogical mindset by design. Giving Greer more focus and character would be pointless and just take away from Brooklyn, who, again, is the focus of the episode. Greer is just the obstacle she and Lunella have to face and overcome, a message a lot of kids need in this day and age. All in all, this Mega Karen may not have been the most subtle, but in this unsubtle time, he is the kind of villain that best represents this gleefully loud and cruel issue. Similarly, Emperor Belos, while way up on the threat scale than a transphobic middle school volleyball coach, was an allegory for intolerance, along with the dangers of not seeing the warning signs of such a viper hiding behind fake, self-righteous ideology. Belos was a young would-be witch hunter with his brother in Puritan times on Earth, only to find out his brother eloped with a witch to the other realm of the Boiling Isles. Killing him in a rage for this betrayal, he set out on a centuries-long plan to destroy the entire island out of religious xenophobia, and to return to Earth a hero. There isn't much to Belos when you look under the hood, though some of that can be attributed to the fact Disney, again, screwed over another good show of theirs by canceling the Owl House prematurely, and leaving them with a 3-part special to wrap things up. End of the day, he was an allegory for the abuses of religious extremism. He's a fanatic obsessed with destroying magic and magical beings, without a hint of irony over the fact he actively uses magic to con the Boiling Isle citizens into thinking he's some great uniter witch, and devouring talismans to keep him alive centuries past his expiration date. Outside of his manipulations and abusive leadership of his coven and his nephew, Hunter, he's just a hypocritical, hateful old man leeching off the very lifeblood of the Titan that is the Boiling Isles. His ultimate goal after all those centuries of ruling the witches was to kill them all with a draining spell he masqueraded as a Day of Unity, to be his great achievement to go back to Earth and glorified as a mighty witch hunter. He was far too into his delusions of glory to be informed that humanity had long let go of the dogmatic witch hunting ways of when he was on Earth, and trying would probably get you killed. For all his big pro-humanity talk, he was not above killing anyone, humans included, if they called him out on his bull or stood in his way of mass genocide. Luz, Edith, and the rest of the Owl House crew all suffered in some way due to the rigid societal stigmas and laws he instilled on the Boiling Isles. Much like Greer, he forced everyone to follow his archaic and rigged rules, not caring for those that's very lives can't exist under them. But when his plans fall apart and his body with him, he ultimately reveals his true nature, a vicious, ugly monster driven by spite, bigotry, and vain idolation he thinks he's owed. The final battle between Luz, Edith, and the gang has them fighting him as a figurative and literal cancer on the Boiling Isles, with his final moments pathetically trying to con sympathy to save himself, for which Luz has none to give, and ultimately finds his evil finally stomped out by the many marginalized members of the Isles he spent centuries tormenting and abusing. Belos didn't need a deep, sad backstory for his bigotry, much like Greer. What little story and depth is enough to paint the picture of a violent, petty xenophobe who was more interested in masking his worst instincts in order to hurt thousands, if not millions, of innocent people out of dogmatic madness and selfish ambition. Ultimately, Belos was a man who was an allegorical and physical blight on the very land and community of witches to his pathetic, bitter end. In the grand scheme of One Piece villains, I doubt Hody Jones is one of the most memorable. I'd honestly be surprised if he showed up in anyone's top 10 villains rankings, given shonen anime fans' usual judging categories. He and his crew, the new Fishman Pirates, ultimately were more of an annoyance to the Straw Hats than a major threat during their arc, particularly with much bigger fish, pun partially intended, waiting for them on the journey to One Piece. But they were a menace to Fishman Island as they were slowly cooking up a rebellion against the royal family, whom they criticized for not being extreme enough in handling the problems they have with humanity. Hody and his crew are a bastardization of the famous Fisher Tiger and the Sun Pirates, a fearsome fishman who spent years fighting the world government and nobles, freeing slaves and rescuing his people. However, one thing Hody's version misses is the fact that while Fisher hated humans, he did admit he knew his hatred was wrong, but he couldn't overcome the trauma and cruelty he saw humanity inflict on fish people, mermaids, and even other humans. In his final hours, he deeply wished for his people to let go of their hate for humanity, if only to move on and not let it poison them like it did him. This was a lesson that would fall on deaf ears, sadly. The new fishmen pirates were infamous for ironically enslaving humans, bullying fellow fishmen who had even slightly nice things to say about humans, and in general took the generational hatred of humans to unstable degrees. So much so they would plot to violently overthrow the royal family to place themselves in charge, and begin a grand crusade against the surface, to pay back humanity in a sea of blood. A plot that Hody would begin by murdering the peace-seeking queen Otohime and framing humans for the deed. That's what's deeply ironic about this group. For all their talk about being there for their people, they will quickly turn on their own if they aren't as extreme as them in their hatred of humans, and especially if you share the late queen's ideas of coexistence with them. When they began their revolution, they forced terrified civilians to step on photos of the beloved late queen, and planned to mass kill all of her supporters who shared her views of coexistence with humanity. Anyone that wasn't ready to massacre and enslave humans with the same psychopathic zeal as them was deemed a traitor and an enemy. Now, given that this is One Piece, you would expect Hody to have some super tragic, sad backstory about humans killing his parents, or being brutalized by the celestial dragons or such. But that's Hody's dark secret. When the first prince of the Fishman Kingdom, Fukaboshi, angrily confronts him, demanding to know what humanity did to him that warranted this monumental hatred that extends to even his own kin that doesn't share his views, his answer is simply nothing. Humans never actually did anything to Hody, or even any of the other members of the new Fishman pirates. It was just what they were taught in the slums of the Fishman district. Hody's backstory is entirely of just a child who never even encountered humans, hearing nothing but the spite, hatred, and desire for revenge from the other adults who just languished in their generational trauma against humanity. Taking cues from early One Piece villain Arlong as his toxic mentor, they were desensitized to the xenophobic cruelty of the adults, and found their twisted mindsets normalized to a disturbing degree. They say hate is learned, and Hody is a star example of it. His crew have no reason for what they're doing beyond it being what they were taught, taken to a perilous extreme. Fukaboshi and his family are floored by this revelation, fully realizing the dangerous, ignorant ideas they've allowed to fester in their own kingdom. To find out the killer of his mother and a man capable of Hody's levels of depravity didn't even have a semi-justifiable reason for it beyond, "This was just my regular Tuesday," fully revealed how badly they've let their people down. The new Fishman pirates weren't bitter, revenge-driven tragic villains. They were just miserable, gleeful sadists and psychopaths, using xenophobia as an excuse to revel in their own cruelty. Hody and his crew were products of a society that didn't properly care or raise them, letting hateful ideologies twist them into thuggish, vicious extremists without a cause beyond blind, aimless destruction. Both Fisher and Otohime were both aware of this being an inevitable fate if the fishmen failed to let go of their hate for humanity, instead of focusing on prospering on their own. While the late queen was considered a fool for trying to seek peace with the humans, she 100% predicted aimless monsters like Hody would be made if they didn't course-correct this toxic generational spite. Luffy and the Straw Hats would help the royal family deal with the causeless extremists, but in a sense, Hody and his crew would do themselves in. In part of their plot, they stole a national treasure from the royal family, which was a set of energy steroids that, when consumed, increased your strength tenfold. They soon began mass-producing and abusing these pills in an attempt to overcome the royal family and the Straw Hats. But after getting their asses kicked, all it does is rapidly age them into decrepit old men by the end of it, former shells of what they once were. Hody personally wasn't a terribly interesting villain, but he was a representation of the dangers of letting extremist and hateful rhetoric raise and twist a young man's mindset into one of deranged malice. He was a monster without cause, a vicious, violent, sadistic fool who stood for nothing, cherished nothing, and ultimately gained nothing for his troubles. Even if he succeeded, he was doomed to fail since his insane plans didn't have much thought beyond kill all the humans and those that protect them. failing to realize just how quickly he would have gotten all of Fishman Island killed with his plans. His evil is one the king and his children were forced to confront head-on if they had any hope of saving their people from their own despair and grudges. Starting with closing down the district Hody grew up in, seeing it as a blight that would breed more aimless malice, and above all, finally attempted to honor their late queen's dream of letting go of their hate and moving forward with humans they can trust. Starting with the straw hat wearing human who saved them all when he and his gang really had no stake in their affairs or even wanted much of anything in return. While their struggles are far from over, and sadly the shittier humans of One Piece will make their attempts to not sink back into Magneto's right mindsets needlessly hard, the fishmen are at least on the road to recovering from their trauma and distrust, fully ensuring to not allow another Hody Jones to ever be born in their children. Before we end out the video, I do want to bring up an honorable mention. Val Yor from the Teen Titans episode Troc is a really good use of a flat, bigoted character who has the right amount of depth, but doesn't need a whole ass backstory to explain his hate. The reason he's not appearing in this video was because I was already working on a video about this episode when this nonsense debate started, so expect that later down the pipeline. Now, this is where I'm gonna clarify my admittedly brash, clickbaity title and add the context that would only fit in the title if it was an isekai anime. No, you don't have to humanize bigots. While some bigoted characters with nuance and depth to their characters is good and should be encouraged, it's not the be-all and end-all take on bigotry like bad faith bozos claim. Tragic bigots can be amazing characters to follow and see their journey from either overcoming their hate or letting themselves be consumed by it, but they are not the only type of bigoted character. Like a lot of things, it's a spectrum. This entire video is about this nothing burger take that unsubtle, unrepentant bigots like Greer are bad writing and unrealistic. That last bit is hilariously ironic. Strip away the fantastical, magical, and superhero silliness of these characters, and their vile, unchecked personalities all came from somewhere in reality. I've met ignorant thugs like Hody who try to window dress their bigoted cruelty with fake nationalist-flavored excuses. I've met dogmatic schemers like Belos who masqueraded their hatred as bullshit religious justifications. And God help me, I have met petty, hypocritical bullies like Greer, who tried to force their small-minded beliefs onto others, and ironically bullied kids with the weak justification of protecting them. Comparing Static Shock's handling of bigotry to today's unsubtle takes on it is unbelievably stupid, when you think about how we are currently in an age where blatant, vile hatred is not punished, but rewarded and monetized. So much to the point that it's an engagement tactic to be an edgy bigot. We live in a time where being intolerant and gleefully proud of such open hatred is normalized, and people sticking up for others and even having empathy is vilified as woke virtue signaling. The gaslighting and dog whistling is so deafeningly loud, we need to be unsubtle. Greer, Belos, and Hody are products of the gleefully open bigotry plaguing society. They didn't need tragic backstories for why they're like this, because sometimes people are just vicious, sadistic monsters who have no reason for what they're doing beyond it being what their societies taught them. It's up to us to be better than that, and to ensure kids know people like this exist, but you don't have to be like them, or let them stomp you out. Their points as characters were to be allegories for the problems people like Brooklyn, Luz, and Ida, and the Fishmen faced, and how through solidarity, mutual understanding, and zero tolerance for the intolerant, can we get back on track to a better tomorrow for everyone. And that's a message this old super security guard will always get behind. Thanks for watching. Hey, thanks for checking out my video. If you enjoyed it, I'd appreciate a like and a comment. They really help us with getting back on track after our little hiatus. Be sure to subscribe for more super security VTuber fun. Bit of a serious topic, but one I felt I needed to discuss, so appreciate those who stuck out to the end. What are your thoughts on characters like Greer, Hody, and Belos? I'm always excited for discussion, just keep it peaceful down below. I also do gaming streams here and on the Purple site, so come check me out if you want to hang. Appreciate you all for watching, and I'll catch you all in the next video.